In this video, we're going to talk about the changes to the Hurrtrak system in 2023. This can be considered supplemental training information in addition to the complete video library that we have available online. The topics we're going to cover in a little more detail are the expertise or the expert analysis feature of the system, the addition of SLOSH data in all versions of the system, EM Pro, RM Pro, Advanced, used differently, the damage description changes we've made, which are quite extensive. Probably most of the changes are centered around the narrative impact statement, and we'll show you a little bit more on that. We now include the surge probabilities in a table form from 1 to 25 feet, as opposed to prior it was just every 2 feet up to a certain amount. Not all of them were shown. A couple system and user option changes. Then under the topic of under the covers improvements, we have annual updates, zip code population data, security, usability, wind estimation, code of uncertainty data, hurricane history data, and several other things that change from year to year. Also, in keeping up with the National Hurricane Center changes, we're going to show some of the things that are going on there. And then finally, the additional training options or opportunities that you have. So we're going to briefly go through each one of these. We're going to have separate topics on these items below. Expertise analysis is our daily discussion, video discussion. The SLOSH-based storm surge levels is the additional SLOSH data we talked about, used in all versions to determine the damage to areas from a tropical cyclone. The revamped or enhanced damage estimation and descriptions, using additional data of tree data, SLOSH data, and wind data. The narrative impact statement improvements, we're going to go into a lot of detail on these. The surge probabilities, and here's an example of what it might look like. Just briefly on those system and user option changes. And then, as we mentioned, some of the under the cover items, a little bit more detail on that. And then keeping up with the Hurricane Center changes, here's an example of one of the things that are changing. And finally, the additional training opportunities will be shown. So please watch the entire training video, it's not too long, to understand how to use these features. In this section, we're going to talk briefly about the expertise tab or the expert analysis, which is the daily weather discussion that we do. It's presented on a video, and during the hurricane season, it's available within the Hurrtrak system by selecting the expertise tab or on the internet. During the off season, winter and spring, it's available only on the internet. We consider this a perpetual enhancement whereby anyone who keeps their software current will have access to these daily weather discussions from our meteorologist. An example of what it might look like in the spring months is a discussion on the severe weather potential, any current severe weather that's going on, and forecast rainfall for the upcoming period, in this case for the next week. So we try to provide interesting weather details for people who are interested in the weather and have a need to know due to their occupation or their interest. So again, we will continue to provide this service for all current Hurrtrak users. And that concludes this short topic. In this video, we're going to talk about the SLOSH-based storm surge estimation. Before we go through these points, it's good to understand what SLOSH is. Briefly put, as it's described here, It stands for Sea Lake Overland Surges from Hurricanes. It's a model. It's a computerized numerical model developed by the National Weather Service to estimate storm surge heights resulting from historical, hypothetical, or predicted hurricanes, taking into account atmospheric pressure, storm size, forward speed, and track data. And then within that is more detailed data called MEOWs, and it's the maximum envelope of water. There's lots of acronyms here. Basically, it's a long-term study about what areas will flood based on storm strength, motion, and size. So that data has been in the Hurrtrak system for years. Up until now, it's only been used to display and create reports using the SLOSH view program module, which all of you have. However, the detailed data, the MEOW data, which has only been part of the advanced system, is now part of every system, the EM Pro, the RM Pro, and the advanced. While the SLOSH view program hasn't changed for those different versions, the usage of the SLOSH data has changed. So in 2023, we are now using this detailed data, the MEOW data, to estimate potential storm surge levels when, this is key, the National Hurricane Center's surge probability data is not yet available. And that's called P-surge. The Hurrtrak system has been showing P-surge data for several years now. However, when the data is not available, there was really no estimate of storm surge for our locations. So for example, it's not available when the storm's landfall is too far out in the future, more than 36 hours, or sometimes there's a delay in the issuance of the P-surge data. Right now, this surge estimate is only included in the narrative impact statement, and it may be added to the standard impact reports at some time in the future. So bottom line, when there's a storm approaching an area and you run a location report, it now includes storm surge inundation estimates, or when the surge probability data is there, it uses that data to come up with the threat of storm surge for that particular location. And we'll see more of this when we look at the narrative impact statement section. Lastly, there is a new option which allows the user to turn this off or back on. And that shows up under the user options, the general section, the first one you see right here. And you might wonder, why would you want to turn it off? For some users, they're not interested in an estimate. They only want to look at the actual surge probability data put out by the National Hurricane Center, which are still estimates. It's just that they have a better estimate because it's closer in, as opposed to looking at data that could be several days out. So depending on who your audience is and their understanding of storm surge, you may want to turn this off or on. So with that, that concludes this topic. However, you're going to see a lot more about this in the narrative impact statement section. In this section, we're going to talk about the changes to the damage descriptions. And there are several key items. And on the right is an indication of some of the additional data we're using. Storm surge, descriptive wind, and actually tree species data. First, what we've removed is the prior Saffir-Simpson scale, which was really storm-based and not a good description for all locations. We also removed the Texas Tech wind scale, which originally was a tornado-based system. What we've replaced the wind descriptors with are a more standard scale used by the Hurricane Center and NOAA. In addition, as I've suggested, we also include some tree species data for some locations, which affects the tendency for power outages and that kind of interruption. What we've added back in In addition to the new descriptive information is the storm surge inundation information. And with that, we now are able to display the information on our reports. The one-word damage Another piece of information we've added is the storm surge inundation estimates. The way this shows up on your system is in a couple places. The one-word damage comment in the location-based reports uses the highest level of wind or surge damage. So if you have very strong winds and very little surge, it'll use the wind damage descriptor. If you have very little wind and a strong surge, then it'll use the surge damage descriptor. On the narrative impact statements, it includes both of them, the wind and the surge descriptions. We're going to take a quick look at an example of a location-based impact report. We're going to examine the narrative impact statement in the next section. So let's take a look at an example location impact report. And in reality, it's a location group impact report. So in this example, we're using Hurricane Ian Advisory 19 as the starting point. And understand at this point in my database, we didn't have any surge probability data. Normally you would, but we're using this as an example. There's no surge probability data, so the system is going to default to the SLOSH base estimation. So if we run a report on, and I'll just use the National Hurricane Center warning points because it's easy to do. You'll see several locations in here. It's not going to have every location because the hurricane watch and warning points don't have every single location, but you can run this for South Florida, other locations. But in this case, what we're looking at, and I think we'll ignore dry Tortugas, is Boca Grande, and we're using advanced wind estimation. Highest winds 99 miles per hour, and they're saying damage major. Yet Fort Myers Beach with 81 miles per hour, they're saying devastating. Same thing with Bonita Beach, 71 miles per hour, devastating. Well, what this is doing is taking the storm surge for Fort Myers Beach, which is 15-foot potential storm surge at this time, and Bonita Beach, which is also a very high storm surge, and saying that's the most important damage factor. Whereas with Boca Grande, it has a smaller surge, it's using the wind speed and calling it major. So that's where that comes in. Now you're saying, where are those values? They don't show up yet on this report. That's something we're looking into. We're a little leery of putting storm surge values on a tabular report like this, because people may take it a little bit too literally. However, we're trying to find out or figure out the best way to do that. I know those values because they're going to show up in a narrative impact statement, which I've already looked at for this report. As I mentioned, you can come up here and select a different set of locations, like here, South Florida. And here's a good example of Naples with a wind speed at this time estimated to be 45 to 60 miles per hour, yet it's showing a devastating storm surge. And I'm going to cheat a little bit and show you the narrative impact statement here, but it's saying 15 feet above ground level is a potential. So that's where the word devastating is coming from. So once again, it's taking the worst case, either wind or surge, and putting that in the damage column. If we were to go into the user options and uncheck this option, then you would only see the wind descriptors. And here's that report without any storm surge calculations. Notice everything is based off of wind. Naples showing a minor damage, yet their storm surge changed that from minor to major in reality. So now what we've done is change it to Advisory 23, where it's just offshore. We do have the surge probability data now as part of the system. So these reports will now default to using surge probability instead of the SLOSH-based storm surge estimates. Surge probabilities being more reliable. So we're still seeing devastating, and that's because the surge probability in those areas is fairly high for a significant level of flooding. In the case of Fort Myers Beach, there was a 56% probability of a 13-foot storm surge, so that puts it into devastating category. So bottom line, this damage descriptor now includes damage from both the wind and or storm surge, depending on which one is more significant. So that concludes this topic. We're going to see more about damage when we get into the narrative impact statements. In this section, we're going to talk about the enhancements to the narrative impact statements. This is best described by dissecting one of these via some example data from the Hurrtrak system. So once again, we're going to use Hurricane Ian approaching from the southwest. In this case, we do have the surge probability data. Later, we're going to show you a narrative impact statement without the surge probability data. So when we run the report on a location group, in this case, the National Hurricane Center watch and warning points, we see the information that we saw in the last section, where we have different locations, damage, devastating, major, moderate, minor, etc. So what I did is export this information to, I'll do it right here, the executive style report. I will just do a preview, and it creates this report, and there are your narrative impact statements. In order to better describe the changes, I went ahead and exported this to a Word document so that we can highlight each section. So here is an example for Fort Myers Beach. Let's highlight each section that has changed from the 2022 version of Hurrtrak. This first section has changed to where you now see, I can get this done correctly. There we go. It talks about a potentially devastating impact, and it has separated the devastating wind gust of 143 miles per hour and a major storm surge as possible. So there's your two descriptors. The next section that has changed is down here. This information about the arrival of winds, etc. has remained unchanged. But the wind damage from Hurricane Ian now is much more descriptive for winds of 143 miles per hour. If this was in an area with large trees, there'd probably be additional information about power outages. The next section that changed, or really the last section, is the information about storm surge. In this case, we're using surge probability. So it says there is a good chance that Fort Myers Beach could experience a storm surge of 13 feet above ground level, and we're using anything above 50%. We do say refer to local statements for more precise information on expected surge flooding. And finally, we do indicate whether this report was issued using advanced wind estimation or not. Here's the report for Boca Grande, and all those sections highlighted, including information about the eye wall being experienced by certain locations. In this example, the wind speeds forecasted are much more damaging than the storm surge expected. So now let's take a look at the narrative impact statement when the surge probability data is not yet available. In this example, using Advisory 19, there was no surge probability data available. We used the SLOSH method, And everything else is the same as far as sections added. However, down here, the wording has changed, that there's a potential that Fort Myers Beach could experience a surge of 15 feet above ground level. No longer is there a percentage placed on it. And then it's emphasized that this is an estimate and refer to local statements for more precise information. Other than that, the narrative impact statements are the same. Just as a refresher, the narrative impact statements are part of the executive reports, the risk impact reports, several different outputs. On the EM Pro, you don't have access to the executive and the risk reports or some of the summary reports, but you are able to select a location, right-click on it, and copy, if I can get it to do it, copy the narrative impact statement to a clipboard or email it. So the bottom line is we've vastly improved the narrative impact statements with additional SLOSH data and more descriptions and better description of wind and SLOSH data, storm surge data. And that concludes this topic. This will be a rather quick section. We're going to discuss the surge probability table. With the storm being advisory 22, we do have the surge probability data available. So you can come up to reports or come over to this icon and say surge probabilities, select a location group. We already did one for the NHC warning group we've been using. And then it'll display the surge probability report location, the state, relative location of where this value is valid, and then the surge probabilities from 1 foot all the way up to 25 feet. So you could see this is sorted in alphabetical order. You can see the Fort Myers Beach is basically near 90%, 100% through 8 feet, and then it drops down. So the chance of a 19-foot surge is 3 feet, and you can see the varying probabilities. And that would be for the entire location group that you selected. So that's pretty much it. Prior to this, we only showed like from 2 foot increments, not all of the different probabilities. And with the changes we've made this year, it seems important to show all of the values. And if you export these, print them, copy them, the program code has been changed now so that all of the values 1 through 25 will display. And as I promised, this is a short topic, and this is that concludes this topic. Another short topic, we feel like we should mention that each version, each update includes a lot of updates to the underlying data, the annual updates to the forecast cone radii, the watches and warnings, the historical data, the National Weather Service zone data changes each year, some of the graphical information, the GIS updates, and all this gets put into the new versions from year to year. This year we did update the zip code population data, which we do about once every 2 or 3 years, and all of the historical data is up to date. So without going into all the details, I just want you to understand that we do update this information constantly and certainly year to year. And in addition, we look at our wind estimation routines and tweak those based on prior storm data and see if we can't improve the estimation routines. And that concludes this little topic. Another relatively short topic that we feel needs to be mentioned is the National Hurricane Center updates the way they do things on a yearly basis pretty much, and we have to react to that. So here are some of the changes for 2023. The peak storm surge forecast graphic is something they have new. At some point this will become digital and it'll be able to be included a little bit better into the hurricane system, Hurrtrak system. Potential storm surge flooding is going to be added for Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. They're going to extend the tropical weather outlook to 7 days, not the actual forecast for storms, which is a little confusing. Initially, some of the headlines said they now have 7-day forecasts. They will not have 7-day forecasts. They're going to have 7-day formation probabilities. It used to be 5 days. So something to keep in mind, and that should be displayed correctly in the hurricane tracking system. They have removed the watch and warning information from the forecast advisory, which affects us here. It doesn't really affect you much. And of course, the annual update to the forecast error cones already been included into the Hurrtrak system. That's an example of that. And then they're talking here in the bottom about experimenting with live streams via YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and when there's a threat. And that would be briefings from the National Hurricane Center, and those are experimental right now. And finally, they've updated their website for several different links. But the key thing is, as they've changed data and formats, we have to react to that, and we do. Each year we like to remind folks where they can get additional information on the Hurrtrak system. There's basically 4 items. One is the documentation, online help, context-sensitive help, and the internet training videos. So let's go through each one briefly. If you go to the help screen, and there's usually tab help and regular help, select the regular help one, and you can display system documentation. It's 394 pages, so we suggest, if you're actually going to go through that, to download it to your system, and then you can view it with your PDF, Adobe PDF viewer. That'll allow you to easily search for terms, items, and sections. But it is quite complete, and in a world where people do not really look at documentation anymore, we still supply the physical documentation for the individuals that like the printed page. The online help can be obtained by selecting help and then contents, and that takes you to general help on the internet, and you can pick different sections on general information, the system components, some how-tos, and a lot of appendices. So that's another way you can get information without looking at the manual. The third way is context sensitive. If you're on a screen, let's say, for example, the general screen here, if you select tab help, it will bring up help specific to the screen you're looking at and information about it. If you go to another page, or let's say the map selection tab, and you select tab help, it'll bring up information on that tab and how that works. This can be very helpful as you navigate the system. Finally, if you go to the PC Weather Products homepage, which is pcwp.com, and select online training videos, you will find more information than you ever wanted on the system and a training video for each section. Be sure, if you use this option, to click to expand all the topics so you can see all the additional topics that have been included. So hopefully, if you're stuck on one section or have a question about one section, you can just go right to that section. For example, how to set up automatic email alerts, and you'll get a 39-minute video on that. But there are some that are designed for new users, refreshers, and then each year we have a training supplement, such as the one you're looking at right now. Don't be concerned that the Hurrtrak for new users may be dated a few years ago, since we're covering some of the basic functions that haven't changed over the years. Reviewing those videos and then coming up to date with the training supplements would be an excellent way of being trained on the system. So hopefully, with all that additional information, you could become a Hurrtrak expert. That concludes this topic.